that's a real Cuban right there.
Yeah, yeah.
What I like about cigars, a couple things. One, it's like meditative for me in a sense because this is bad boys like a 45-minute smoke right here, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that just kind of keeps you in your seat for a minute, and you have to just you know what I mean? Like
you just have to sit and breathe.
Right. It's kind of like for me. It's similar to like hiking. Right. When I go hiking, like I have to be focused on the hike, the nature.
Yeah.
Here I'm smoking a cigar. I can't do. You know what I mean? It's about that. It's about that moment, enjoying it. So I appreciate that. And also, it's like it's just like it's a craft. So like people appreciate cars.
Yeah, you can appreciate
music,
the quality.
Can appreciate
of what you're.
What do you have that's like that? What are you into that's like a craft?
I enjoy doing cross country running. I used to play a lot of tennis, but I've kind of dropped doing that as much in favor of just doing running. And then I like reading and architecture. So like I appreciate
nice.
good
the architecture. There
I appreciate good writing, and then architects I just find it's very like creative, and I'm interested in the idea that everything is designed or everything is intentional.
Hey guys, we got another episode of Off the Top. I'm here with my man Sid, the founder of Maple Finance. Thank you, Sid, for coming through. Great to see you, brother.
Glad to be here, man.
Cool, man. Let's get into it. It's nice and early, so we usually do whiskey, but we got coffee today. Cheers. So why don't we start there? You're a morning person. I'm a morning person as well.
Yeah.
What's your morning routine, and how does that kind of play a part in your daily life?
Yeah. Normally I'll get up at 5:30 or 6. I try and do a few emails and things, sort of get a bit of a jump start on the day. Then I'll try and go to the gym, do like a workout, maybe a run, and then for me it's coming back. I typically eat the same thing, like a chicken wrap. And
that's your breakfast?
Yeah. I try and eat like the same thing over and over again, and also something that I don't have to cook. Mm-hmm. So then from there it's just straight into calls, emails, and because I'm managing people, that's most of my craft is communicating with people either over a call, over email, just kind of pushing out objectives and goals.
Totally. Yeah, for me, I do my kind of mornings are structured pretty much the same. I was working for UBS a few years back, and I had to support managers that were out in London, so I would wake up and just be slammed with like tasks to do in my email. So the routine I got in was like knocking out a bunch of like task related stuff in the morning, just getting all that off my plate, and then go do the workout, clear my mind, and come back. And I feel like I can bring the creative energy of what I do after I eat and work out. I like to do the same breakfast as well. I do a shake, like simple banana, almond milk, like that's it.
Yeah. No, it's the routine stops you from having to think about, it stops you from having to make too many unimportant decisions early in the morning. But I find I need to go and check emails, Telegram, Slack first thing in the morning, because otherwise, because we're a global company, stuff will happen overnight, and so I've got to be caught up on it first thing in the morning. And if I'm not, then I just feel like out of sorts.
Totally. Speaking of being a global company, I know you come from a very different time zone, a land down under. I've said on this podcast a few times how much one of my favorite things about crypto, is meeting people from all different cultures and getting to learn about that. And yeah, man, my Aussie friends are definitely some of my favorite. Really enjoy a few of the Australian companies I work with, and it's interesting to see so many cool DeFi companies coming out of Australia. So, why don't you tell me? Like, I'm just curious to hear about life growing up in Australia. Like, generally, like, what's it like down there? Cultural differences from America.
It's a good question. So, I grew up in a smaller city called Adelaide. So it's in the south of Australia, and it actually frequently rates as one of the most livable cities in the world. So very relaxed. It's suburban. It's got this, nice, neatly laid out city on a grid, and then surrounded by parklands, a river, and then the suburbs. And so it's really idyllic. It's calm. it's a nice place to go and catch up with the family and relax. But there wasn't a ton happening once I graduated university and I was trying to move into the workforce and sort of build my career. So I then shifted to Melbourne. And I found Melbourne had a bit more, just a bit more hustle. It was
More
a bit
action.
more, yeah, it was more cosmopolitan. There's more people starting up businesses there, just more action. And so I'd say culturally, Australia is very similar to the US. It's maybe a little bit more that you follow a career path that's laid out, whereas here I think there's a little bit more desire to go and start new things, which is probably something that the US has, which is quite unique versus other countries. But otherwise, I would say culturally it's very similar, and so it's very easy to come over here and do business from having grown up in Australia.
Cool. Yeah. No, I could definitely see that. What? Tell me about yourself as a kid. Like, what was it like? What were you like as a kid growing up in Australia?
Yeah. So, growing up in Adelaide, I played a lot of tennis, and so we were a big tennis family. So it was like my dad played tennis, my mom played tennis, me and my brother both played tennis growing up. So that was like most weekends. So we'd play it in the morning, Friday night, in the morning on Saturday, in the afternoon, and so you just be exhausted, and that'd be a lot of your weekend. But I thought it was really good. Like we had beautiful sports facilities around Adelaide, and so there's like a really nice culture. You meet people that way, and so I suppose the other aspect. So tennis was a big part of me, like my childhood, and then I also used to read a ton. So I was, even from the age of like 10, 11, I'd read biographies of like historical figures. And it'd be like a Napoleon, or it'd be like a Hannibal, then, business leaders. And so I've always sort of gravitated to reading a ton of history and biographies. I was never as interested in fiction, because what I like is reading about people who have done really important, high achieving, difficult things, and then the challenges they face. So it's easy to get lost in your own head when you're facing a challenge, but if you read a biography of someone from 150 years ago, you can get perspective. They faced things that were as difficult, if not more difficult, than what you're facing.
And they didn't have the tools.
And they didn't have the tools, but it's always relative. So people 150 years from now will still face really difficult problems, and so you got to zoom out, and that's what I like about history and biographies. So that was another big part of my childhood.
I like that. Yeah, for me, much different, man. For me, like I didn't have as much of like a stable family, and I think I just had a natural thing always in me to rebel. Like I was just the kid that pushed the envelope, learned the hard way, put my feet in the fire and just felt the flames, and I think like I really enjoy, you talk about historical figures, like I enjoy learning about people who made mistakes along the way and got beat up and learned from them and just continued fighting. Like those are the kind of people that inspire me.
Yeah.
And in my particular case, I would say like one thing that I learned along my journey that I think I bring to my job today is like when I would get in trouble as a kid, I would get sent away to different schools. I was constantly switching boarding schools and this camp and that program and this and that. And what that did was it forced me to become friends with people quickly, because I was just plopped in a new place with a whole group of people, and I would have to learn how to connect to them. And like
that's good.
Obviously I couldn't appreciate that in the moment, it sucked. But like now I'm like, wow, I have a unique ability to just get in the room and make friends. You know what I mean? Well, is there anything like from your childhood like that you're like, okay, like this is something directly that I apply today?
For sure.
Probably in sports, like team, but tennis is not.
Well, tennis I never played a lot of team sports. So I played cricket, a bit of soccer growing up, but then I kind of gravitated from that more to tennis. And then from tennis later on more towards cross country. So I like the solitary, like the solitary sports and activities where I'm pretty competitive, but the ones that I enjoy are where it's just kind of me competing against myself almost. So, in a lot of ways, cross country running is just your ability to kind of endure pain. So it's more of a grind focused thing. And I found that helps me in business and in working on Maple, because you're not worried about completing something. You know that you'll get there. It's just how long is it going to take you to do it, and you're comfortable setting in for a pretty sustained grind, because you're kind of used to just going through that in a run. And so yeah, I find that's probably one of the things, just the ability to keep grinding through things that are not that pleasant.
Isn't it interesting, like, as you continue on through life and go through new experiences, you don't, when you're growing up in the past, you don't know how these things these lessons are going to apply. Another thing that's interesting for me, kind of on the note of what you're saying about reading the biographies and everything like that, when I was just like, regular recruiter back in the day, I used to, just for entertainment, I would watch all these podcasts, like the motivational guys, the ones that we all see, Tim Ferriss, Gary Vee, all them. And I kind of was just watching these for entertainment purposes. I didn't necessarily have like but I took in this information, right? I didn't have a goal, I didn't have a plan, but I took in the information. And then when I started up top, like, all of a sudden I was like, wow, like, I know exactly what to do now. Like, I knew what the next step was because of all the stuff that the content I was watching.
That positivity and just reframing whatever challenge you're facing, I think, is super important. There was I think it was an episode of one of the Tim Ferriss episodes, but he had the guy who used to host the Amazing Race, Jeff Probst or something. But the guy was talking about how the lesson he tells his kid is not that you can't, you have to do this, it's that you get to do this. And so I think that's just a reframing that takes it from a burden to a challenge to enjoy and to try and overcome. The other thing I did a lot as a kid, actually, was I had notebooks, and so I'd draw inventions, whether it's like airplanes or this kind of thing. But I used to do that a lot, and I'd watch kind of cartoons that were futuristic. So whether it was like Dexter's Laboratory, Transformers, all this sort of stuff. So those were that was probably the other thing I did a ton, like, right through to the age of, I don't know, like early teens.
And before we jump into some other stuff, you mentioned Napoleon, you mentioned some historical figures. So is Napoleon like one of the historical figures that you...
Yeah.
And by the way, this is a pointed question. Like, low key, I know about this from your interviews.
Yeah. Napoleon's my favorite. So I've probably read, I don't know, a couple of dozen biographies on him. And he, used to be, like, I used to have probably half a dozen different biographies just sitting on my shelf that I've read a few times. And what I like about Napoleon was, he came at the end of the French Revolution, and he was basically a self-made man. So this prodigious talent for organizing people who, won a campaign in Italy when he was in his 20s, was kind of consul by the time he was 29 or 30, but had a talent for organizing, not just in the military, which was kind of it was the closest thing you had to being head of a large company in the days before companies existed.
Right, that's true.
And so all the most talented people in history were often the only place they could go to kind of organize large groups of people was the army. So you look at people like Julius Caesar, the Duke of Marlborough, Napoleon. What it required is the same set of skills as what you have running a company. It's giving people context, giving them direction, organizing people in a fluid and changing environment. But his competencies extended beyond just the military to, he had the code Napoleon, which is still the foundation of the French legal system today.
Wow.
He modified the school system so that they had École Polytechnique. Also had the Concordat. He was competent across such a range of things, which you just don't see in other sort of historical figures.
Interesting, man. I don't take you as a conqueror type, but maybe I'm not.
No, there's always a degree of competition in whatever you do.
For sure.
So, but it doesn't have to be the primary thing. But I think what I admire about him most is just his energy, and he was always working. So he often talks about how he would burn through his secretaries and aide-de-camps because they just couldn't keep up with the level of activity. He'd compose something like 40 or 50 letters a day. sometimes more.
There was something interesting that I heard on a podcast once that really inspired me, and I'm sure Napoleon could relate to it. But and I definitely like applied this lesson to business, which is like, if you're trying to, and I think any war general will probably resonate. If you're trying to win a battle, or if you're trying to beat a competition, you don't want to or trying to dominate an industry. Let's just say if you're trying to dominate an industry, you don't want to just step into the main stage and take on all the competitors at once. Like all the main people who are already here.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to bring them into your arena, in your home location, your home field, and make them compete with you where you're good and where you're strong. Yeah. And in business, that's like finding a small niche, dominating that niche, and then you can expand after that once no one can compete with you there. And if you're smart and you're thinking forward, it's somewhere that your competition will want to be, but make them compete with you, and you're already crushing it over there. And that's how I feel with like recruiting in crypto. Like when I started doing this, I was doing quant engineers for crypto hedge funds. Like that is an extremely small niche. You know what I mean? And that was very purposeful. Yeah. And still, no one can mess with me in that arena. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I do. I think success in business or whatever you do comes from finding a niche. So if you look at writers who are really successful, they don't try and pursue multiple different genres. They find an initial niche that they're really, really good at. Mm-hmm. And it's the same in business. So any successful startup, I think, they can't begin with a broad approach where they're trying to succeed across the whole stack or the whole breadth of an industry. So with Maple, we didn't come into lending and say we are going to go across the entirety of like every different kind of loan, every different kind of business. We said, no, we're going to start with, working capital loans to one part. Like within crypto, we're going to go to one subsector. And I think it's, it's like the idea that Charles Darwin talks about. It's about finding fitness, and fitness comes from having an advantage in one niche. And then you expand from there.
We're gonna get into Maple. We're gonna really get into highlighting the culture of Maple and the brand, which, like, hands down the strongest brand in crypto. But before we get into all the business side, I got one more like personal question.
Sure.
What do you do to shut your brain off from crypto? Because we're here. You're here in New York for the last 2 weeks on the conference tour. Then you're going to SF.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know what that feels like, and I know for me, like, I was out watching football with my friends the other day, and I just had a moment where I was just like, wow, like, it's been a minute since I've been in a room that's like completely has nothing to do with crypto. Yeah. And it's like, a breath of fresh air for a second, because you realize feel like I've been underwater for a minute. So when you want to escape this, what's your like go-to like mindless activity?
Yeah. It's for me, I go for a run. I go for a run, or I go to the gym and I read a book.
Got it.
So it's kind of those three things. But I had to evolve that as a way to decompress, because I've been traveling on the road for now about 12 months. So I came out of Australia early September last year, and then I immediately started going to conferences. And so I went conferences here, Miami, London, Lisbon, Amsterdam. Like, I've just been bouncing around for about 12 months, with some periods where I can sort of settle in a place for a few weeks. But that constant movement, you're shifting your body clock, your sleep, and
catches up to you.
Yeah, and so sometimes you get into like periods of really, really high stress, and you just don't want to, you don't want to sit down and have a meeting, or you're at the fifth straight hour of calls. What I do then, if I can find a break, is I'll go to the gym, or I go for a run, or pick up a book. Usually it's go to the gym or go for a run.
It's important to turn your mind off for a minute and just recalibrate.
And I think you have to exhaust your body to refresh your mind.
Agreed. I like that. Agreed. So you mentioned Australia and going on the tour and being all everywhere. How was the decision to leave Australia and move to Miami? Like, how did you land on Miami particularly?
It was trial and error. So we made the decision. So a lot of our team is in the US. Some people are in the UK, and some are in Western Europe. But it was clear that we couldn't run the company from Australia, where most of the team and most of the talent was kind of elsewhere. So, we used to have to get up at, me and my co-founder Joe, we were having to get, like, he's a late night person, so he would be up until 4 a.m. I would be waking up at 4 a.m. when I was in Australia to try and take calls with the US. And so we figured actually that it would probably have to be New York. More customers, splits the time zone between West Coast of the US and Europe. And so that was where I initially spent a bunch of time. I came here initially for conferences. I left, did conferences elsewhere, kept coming back to try and take business meetings. But then when I was in New York, just before Christmas, I was going out for runs, and my hand would freeze around my phone. So one day when I came back from a run, I was like, "Oh, screw this. I'll."
And does Australia get low temperatures like that, or
in
not?
Melbourne and Canberra, yeah. Sydney, no. Sydney's much warmer year round.
Or like California weather.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I wanna my end game is San Diego for sure.
Yeah. We got a couple of people in San Diego. I've never been there. Yeah.
I didn't know people worked in San Diego.
Yeah,
It's just so nice all the time.
Only now that it's remote.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Miami, the culture is probably not exactly for me, but I could see how it'd be fun for a little while.
Well, yeah, I initially had that preconception about it, but being there, a lot of people have
It's definitely changing.
Yeah, a lot of people have moved down from New York because it's on the same time zone. And so there's a pretty good crypto community. There's more of a startup community there now. So we actually have a ton of people where you can hang out with, and it's not about partying.
To New York quickly and easily.
Super easy.
Yeah, true. So, all right, so let's talk, I've been watching a couple of your other podcasts, and, for anyone who's watching this, if you want to learn about, like, the technical intricacies of Maple Finance, and there's plenty of other. Sid has done a lot of content around that where you can get that information. I know you guys at Maple produce a lot of content internally. Just talking about the company, but I just have one of my questions that I had when I was watching one of your other interviews is like you mentioned that like when you thought of the idea of Maple, you were working at a corporate in corporate credit and just had the idea of like, hey, how can I apply smart contracts to this business? And when I heard you say that, I was just like, wow, what were the other people in the office's reactions to that? Like, did people think you were crazy? Did people think you were like out of your mind? Like, what was the deal? Or did they just support it?
People, I don't think people think you're out of your mind, but there's definitely, there still is a lot of skepticism about blockchain, whether blockchain is useful or whether it's just a vanity. A vanity way to execute something that could be done ordinarily in a Web 2 or conventional kind of way. So I remember the initial period thinking about it, doing research on it. It was probably 12 months later or 9 months later that I started actually mentioning it to other people there. But otherwise, it was just me and my co-founder who would talk about it together.
Did you work together?
Yeah, we did.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So, we'd hatch the idea working.
So you found someone who like accepted the idea.
Yeah. So we each thought it was a good idea and would chat about it and you refine it, and then it was it's probably like 9 months later, mention it to some other people at the company, but they were pretty supportive. I think they skeptical of whether it's going to work, but most startup ideas don't work. So
true.
People are kind of naturally skeptical of that, but. But since then it's been kind of funny because you have some people who immediately get it, who might come from a finance background, and some people who immediately think it's a scam because it's blockchain and crypto.
It's funny watching some of your podcasts that you've done with TradFi people. Like I can see that even though they're interviewing you and they respect Maple, they respect what you're doing, they're still not fully came around to the idea of DeFi.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because a lot of people will say that because something can be done another way, there's therefore no point in doing it on blockchain. It's like, well, sure, you could also buy books from a bookstore,
right?
But then we wouldn't have Amazon, would we?
Nice.
And it's the same for just about every new thing that's ever been done. Like it wasn't totally different.
I could definitely relate to that. And but here's a question: like when you all right, so you're bouncing ideas back and forth with Joe, and you're getting a little farther down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
When you had the light bulb moment, like this is what I'm gonna do, like this is the future.
Yeah.
Like this is going to work. What did that light bulb moment feel like?
Well, initially we were very excited about it and felt it would work, but then, so this is just chronologically, mid 2018, had the initial idea. started researching it, read all the white papers from the ICO period, and then early 2019 wrote a white paper for Maple. So right through 2019, we were working with a software development studio in Australia, which I met through going to meetups. And they helped us make a proof of concept. And then when we released the proof of concept, VCs still were very skeptical and didn't think it was a great idea. Or they thought it was a great idea 5-6 years from when we were having the conversation. So it was a lot of rejection. So nobody really embraced. People all thought it was cool, but nobody really embraced it as a workable idea. It was always, oh, we'll come back as it develops a little bit more. So it was like, thanks for the conversation. Don't want to touch this right now. Come back in 6 or 12 months. And so that was the first. Yeah, that was from October 2019, right through to like June 2020.
But did you ever have anything like, for me, like in my experience, like I knew when I landed on like, this is what I'm gonna do and this is how I'm gonna do it. Yeah. Like I started, like when I first started, and it went really well from like day one. Like I kind of knew like this is it from day one. And I remember specifically this feeling of just like 24-hour energy, adrenaline. Like I just couldn't sleep. Like the second I would wake up, I would just get to thinking of.
I had that,
you know what I mean?
As well. Like
that was a fun feeling, fun time.
It's this fun euphoric phase where you have the initial idea, and we had that, and then you'd go and download all these papers, start reading them. You're thinking about how yours is going to be your idea is so much better, and how everyone's going to immediately recognize how great it is. And then you go through the trough of despair, where everyone tells you how stupid it is, and you start realizing all the challenges that you didn't think about initially on the first part. Sure. But everyone has to go through that. It's very natural, and it happens with everything.
It actually makes you feel like you're doing something right, because you know what I mean. This is supposed to happen. You read enough books to where like, all right, this is part of the process.
It's like the more the smarter you get on a topic, the more you realize you don't know.
Facts. Yeah. Well, and so for me, like the next step was when I met the framework guys. They put the battery in my back and like really supported me and believed in me. Yeah. And it elevated me to the next level very quickly. Yeah. So who was the first one to like believe in you? You mentioned VCs rejecting you. Who was the first VC that was like, all right, like we're getting behind this? Maybe not a VC, just someone in crypto who supported you and believed you. Yeah,
we had. Well, there was the software dev studio that we worked with, which was Flex Dapps, and those guys are now doing individual projects. So they've got, one of them's working on Chainflip, the other's working on Talisman, but they were really supportive early on, so that was fantastic. They were also working with us as like a vendor building the project. So the first people who were external, who wanted to put money into it or back it.
Right, you're paying these guys. I'm talking.
Advisors who actually wanted to help and be part of it. We had it was Apollo Capital out of Australia, not the big PE firm here, and Orthogonal. So Josh, the principal from Orthogonal, who they now have built out a credit business on the platform, but they were people who early on we told about it, and then they started connecting us with VCs to help us raise like the first seed round.
And that momentum just started to build and build.
Yeah, but I remember it was funny because we went through kind of an ideas maze. So we had that first concept, and then it totally didn't work, or it was too early, and so we had to pivot and build effectively a peer-to-peer type lending business. But even still, that didn't work. And so then we tweaked, not pivots, but tweaks. Sure. And so then we kind of integrated the two of them, where we have pools on Maple, plus there are actually loans being originated. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of vertical integration was the product of, two changes, quite significant changes to how we were going to do things. But that evolution was 12 months in the making. Mm-hmm. And so there was a huge period where we're kind of like, why isn't this idea working? And what do we do to make it work? And but then as we got through to mid to late 2020, that was when we had Henrik and Josh really help with the investor connections and the VC connections. And then from there, there was like a 2-week period of pitching where I just wasn't sleeping because I have to pitch 3 different time zones. And that was really when we first had this exciting moment that people actually wanted to back this thing and support it. I still remember the first person was like, "Oh yeah, I'll commit like 50 or 60K or something," and like that was like huge for us.
Sure, yeah. That's awesome. So in these early days when you're pitching, did you already have the brand Maple? Like, were you conscious and aware of your brand at that early stage, or no? Were you just thinking about the idea?
No, I thought about the brand. So we wanted. So we worked in debt capital markets. So where the name Maple came from was you always had a stack of debts. You have senior, mezz, junior, so debt stack. And you have a cash flow waterfall, which goes first to senior, then to mezz, then to junior. And so I thought about it as a pancake stack with maple syrup going from top to bottom. But that's just a leap,
so
a metaphor.
Random. I feel like no one would. I feel like that no one would assume that.
Yeah. So that was a metaphorical leap. But what we wanted was the imagery, an evocative, warm feeling, a word that people could Google or look up or send you an email when you say what your email is. And that came from the fact that I'd seen a lot of fintech companies where they take a financial word, cut it in half, and then take a tech word, cut it in half, and then they put the two together. And so I didn't want that. I wanted something more memorable. And then I also wanted something where people can actually Google you or look you up, but where there isn't already a lot of real estate parked on it. And so there wasn't, there were no well-known companies with maple behind it. There's maple syrup, of course, so people thought we were Canadian really early on. But there's
Canadians gotta feel some type of way about that.
Yeah. But there's no real estate that we had to kind of overcome. And the other thing I see startups do now is they'll take a word and they just take the vowels out, and it's like nobody can search that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's super important. Like I feel like I kind of got lucky. Early on, I had a brand consultant help me draw the logo, and up top is kind of a personal thing for me. It was just like when I was in college, actually, like I always used to have the top floor at the dorm, and when we moved I had the top floor in the frat house. So everyone would be like, "Hey, where's Dan? We're gonna go meet up with Dan. We're gonna go up top to see Dan." And it's one of these things that just kept, as I'm 35 now, so over the years, like it's just a word that just kept being repeated in my group chats, like, "Oh Dan, we up top, like where you at?" And it was something that it just kept getting repeated, and it stuck. It stuck. And I feel like what I've learned along the way is that having a brand that means something to you personally, it makes it easier for people to connect to you and your brand. And I think brand connectivity is just so important. I think Maple has created like an engaging brand around what you guys are doing. Shout out to Charlotte.
Yeah, no, Charlotte's done a fantastic job building the brand, and you have to do something different. So the other thing was when Maple, it's in lending, so lending infrastructure, but still in that space, and everyone says, well, you got to do color blue. Blue is institutional. Blue is conservative. People trust blue. And I sit there thinking, well, if everyone's doing blue, I'm going to go do something else, because otherwise we're not going to stand out.
For sure.
And one of the brands I actually often talk about, which is one that I don't think should exist and be this chain that's across, US, Australia, London, everywhere, is like Joe and the Juice. So they've got this complex logo. It's not simple. Nobody could draw it. And then they use this unique pink color, which again, nobody would tell them to use a color like that in the logo. But I think it's successful, and it's recognized because it's unique and different, and it did things that people would otherwise say go against conventional branding wisdom. So nobody says put orange as a color of trust around financial products or institutional stuff. But that's what allowed us to stand out.
Right. And so you've captured people's attention. You're well known in the space, and now it's about building a culture that represents your brand. So talk me through that. Like, what's important to you culturally as a company?
What's important to you culturally changes as you grow, but it's more like it evolves. So we actually we actually began with quite deliberate values, even when we were half a dozen people, and we've kept those values today. So we have 4 core tenets, and they relate to being a startup in a really fast moving space. So we had take ownership. So we always want people who they don't have to be followed up a bunch of times. They want to take on something and see it succeed, because how well they do that reflects on them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really just practically important in a small startup to have people who do that. And so that was take ownership was number 1. Focus and execute was number 2. And I think this is really important in crypto. So you see a ton of people who will start a project, they build half the sandcastle, and then they just move on to the next thing. And it's because often it's either the first project is not getting the traction that you wanted, and so you feel like you have to go and do a second project, or you just haven't. But I actually think it's that you haven't executed to the degree that you should have, and that a lot of the difference in success or failure of a lot of projects is just that ability to focus on one thing and carry it through to completion. So that's our second value, is focus and execute. So Maple doesn't want to do 6 projects at once. Maple wants to do 1 to 2 things really, really well, nice, and then move on to the next thing. And then the third one is be innovative. I mean, we're in an innovative space, but there's a lot of people who might fork code, or they just look at what's been done before. And it goes for things as diverse as branding as well. So don't just do what's been done before. Be innovative.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be afraid to take some risks.
So I hear you talking about a lot of like corporate principles, and then you're also talking about like innovation in the DeFi space specifically. So I'm sure you can agree that one thing I've noticed, like one of the biggest challenges that we see in the space overall is the fact that these two sides of the coin, sometimes it's hard to find a middle ground between like the TradFi institutional folks and the DeFi degens. And I think, like I said, that's one of the biggest challenges that our industry as a whole faces. Yeah. And no one's doing that better than Maple. The ratio, the cultural ratio of, institutional corporate to degen DeFi. So what are your thoughts on that? How do you play that field? How do you navigate that?
I think you start with an end state in mind, and then you work backwards. So we wanted to be differentiated, but our background, our as we talked about at the beginning, our home turf, the place where we're strongest was the institutional finance game. So that's why we wanted to focus on going after institutions on the borrow and the lend side. And so with that in mind, that was kind of different. But we knew what we were about, and that was our vision for what Maple was going to be and where it would succeed in the future. And when you know that, or when you have that end state in mind, it allows you to kind of withstand the noise of the current noise. And so keep in mind that this is seemingly successful now, but 12 months ago people were saying no, you need to lean into the degens and DeFi 2.0, and that you won't achieve the kind of growth if you're not focused on that market. And so it was always a conscious decision of us playing more in this institutional space, but it seemed like a bad idea to other people who were looking at Maple from the outside in, 12 or 18 months ago, because we weren't having as much volume. We weren't getting mentioned as much in social media, or picked up and noticed as much by the DeFi community. And people also said as well that what we're doing kind of went against the DeFi ethos of trustlessness, or having no involvement of people or human judgment.
And that was like a moment in DeFi when people were kind of too far in the other direction, and now we're kind of feeling the impact of that. There has to be some sort of middle ground, right?
Yeah. But also, it's horses for courses. Like, there are a ton of different products that people want, and if you restrict yourself by saying we can only do things where everything is totally algorithmic, well, you kind of end up with a bit of a narrow range of, I think, products, but also you ignore the fact that blockchain is this really incredible layer of infrastructure. It's like the internet. It's like the interstate highway system in the U.S., which spans the whole country, and then you create a trucking company on top of that. But you couldn't have done that you couldn't have had the trucking company until there was the highway system. And so, we could build this international capital market once there was the ability to send money between any 2 points on the globe.
In this analogy, are you the highway or the trucking company?
We're the trucking company. Ethereum's the highway.
Got it.
Blockchain is the highway. But it's this layer of commons infrastructure that we can use. Same with, you couldn't have had a lot of other companies in the early 20th century without the electricity grid. You couldn't have had online e-commerce without Visa and MasterCard and international payments.
So you're like a fully institutional organization that's based on the highways of DeFi, pretty much.
Yeah, but we've always done things that were kind of slightly different. So even when we're starting Maple, and we started it with this, institutional capital market in mind in 2019. Early 2020, we were having to do peer-to-peer lending, but people were saying under or uncollateralized lending, which is now unsecured but still recourse. Like, people will still be taken to court if they default. But people said that could never be done on chain. So that's kind of the, this Peter Thiel idea of you got to have a secret that people disagree with. That was it then. And then as we evolved, we were still focused on institutions when all the activity was in degens and projects like Olympus and these others. And so we've always had that conviction that other business models can succeed, but ours is really just focused on serving that market.
So over the last 12 months or so, how have you seen institutional adoption change? Like, you must have received much more pushback in the beginning than you are now.
Yeah.
Talk to me through that.
Yeah. So we're at the stage, it began at the stage where people didn't want to take your call about it. Then we progressed through the stage where they're kind of skeptical interest and they're just wanting to learn a little bit more. We're coming kind of to the end of that stage, and now they're starting to actually participate. So if you chart the path of some multi-billion-dollar asset manager, at first they viewed a product like us with skepticism. Then it might be an analyst or an associate reaching out. Soon it's kind of the executive committee you're presenting to them, and then at the stage we're at now, it's kind of now doing like proofs of concept, or they might use it in a small way and then look to expand. But institutions move very slowly, and they say that in science it advances one funeral at a time, and it's kind of like swapping out one board of directors at a time for institutions to use new technologies. So often what you see is that whether it's a large private equity company, they're all pretty well known now, but every new wave of either distribution or innovation or financial products leads to a new crop of institutions. The really successful investment banks like Goldman Sachs weren't the first to do private equity. They weren't the most, and then private equity gave way to VCs. Now VCs are giving way to a different type of asset manager who is participating in this space. So I'm looking out more for who are the new innovative firms that are coming up, rather than just trying to convince the old hats of that this is worth them participating in. With any new technology paradigm, it's a new crop of participants who capitalize on that and grow. E-commerce was Amazon. Walmart didn't make the shift.
Sure.
They were a late adopter, and it's going to be the same in finance. So what we're trying to do is work out who is the right fit for that niche, find them, educate them, help them, and you can see that in the firms that are using Maple today. It's not the largest credit fund in the world that came and set up a pool on Maple, because that would have been like GM going all in on electric cars. It didn't make sense. Their whole organization is oriented around existing products. So when you look at the credit funds today, it's like they have a very specific product that they sell and that they feel they get paid to do. You have to find a new market who recognizes the value of the new technology, and they're going to be smaller because it's going to make a difference for their organization.
Fast. Now, you expect the big organizations to come follow.
And then they'll come and be late adopters.
So let me ask you, like, in this process, like, from my seat, what I've noticed as a big challenge for some of the institutional folks is, like, ego. I feel like ego plays a big part. And maybe connecting the whole conversation full circle is like the Australian culture. There's not that much ego in that culture from all the people that I mentioned. So what's the impact of ego on accepting new change and coming into DeFi?
Yeah, I mean, ego is really tough. You can have a big ego. I feel like I have an ego. I don't think
every founder
every founder does
needs to have an ego.
Yeah. So I feel like I have an ego, but what you have to do is separate what is healthy exercise of that, confidence, self-belief, taking risks, versus unhealthy, which is, jealousy, pettiness, reacting badly to challenges or criticism, and not taking it as an opportunity to grow. I think Michael Jordan obviously had a huge ego, but he also said he really actively went after feedback on what he wasn't doing well. He'd ask his coaches, he'd ask other players, what can I do better? And he was always trying to improve. And so, I think if you balance that kind of ego, Australia culturally is probably, skews lower ego. But there is also this idea, I don't actually know how much it bears out in reality, but this idea of tall poppy syndrome, which is that the tallest poppy gets cut first. And, so the idea is to keep people grounded. I feel like I try and keep kind of grounded when it comes to not getting over my skis.
So in the Michael Jordan example, I feel like Maple and Michael Jordan are both up and coming. They're working. For real. They're working on their game. They're building it up.
Yeah.
And but the ego that I'm speaking about is the player who's already the number one player in the league, who has to say like, okay, I have to switch my game to play with Michael Jordan because he's doing something different. And if I don't learn this if I don't learn to defend the step back, how am I going to play with Michael Jordan, right? And I think that prevents the institutions from having open dialogue with the DeFi people because they don't respect them and they don't understand what they're doing and they don't want to understand because I'm so good at what I've been doing over here that I'm not even worried about you. And I think that's where the language barrier comes into play. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. I have found that speaking the same language as someone, and I mean financial terms, institutional financial terms, helps. A lot. Definitely helps kind of reach an accord and get them more comfortable in participating or doing a partnership of some kind.
And DeFi people have ego too. Sometimes they don't want to use those financial terms because they don't want to feel like an old suit with a tie. And you know what? Sometimes like that's how you bring them into your world. To an extent.
For sure. But the thing is, when you talk to those institutions, you have to find somebody who's kind of up and coming or wants to make a name there. If you go to the chairman of JP Morgan, there's nothing to gain for that person in looking at DeFi or doing something on blockchain. You have to find the rising star who wants a project that they can attach their name to propel their career trajectory. Same with anything.
And it scares me a little bit to think of that type of corporatization structure, like that turns me off as a degen. Right? That turns me off, and I feel like during the next bull run, I mean, eventually it has to get there to that point, and I hope that Maple can be a pioneer of a type of DeFi native, crypto native company that can do that corporate structure right. So, what are your general thoughts on how that plays out?
I was just going to add one other thing, which is I think people who get brought in now into these larger asset managers who get brought into like a head of, whether it's head of digital assets, head of blockchain projects, all of these people that I see, they are kind of surveying things. So they're waiting to move. And so I think as an organization, if you are thinking of creating like a digital asset team and you're quite large, you have to like light a fire under the butt of whoever you put into that position in charge of things.
Which
so
is
you
not
have to get them
comfortable.
And it's like when you hire a new developer, you want to get them shipping something really straight away. And so I think when they bring in a new executive in charge of one of those projects or an area which is digital assets, you have to get them to ship a project almost straight away. Because what I've seen is that they all come in and then they're kind of like those people who are waiting to buy a house and they're like, no, I got to wait for it to drop 4%. Or it drops 4%, they're like, I'm worried about it dropping another 2%. But they're always waiting and they never pull the trigger. And then they just end up in this malaise where they're too afraid to take their first steps. And that's what I've seen with almost everyone who's come into a large asset manager and headed up an area, whether it's new credit, new digital assets. And so how I think about it is when we bring people in as an organization or put them in charge of things, we have to get them shipping and we have to make them
look good.
Yeah, well, you want to make them look good. You want them to make themselves look good.
Yeah, you want
You want to empower them to take action, and you got to push them with a sense of urgency, and that's a lot of what you do running a company is just creating a sense of urgency.
Interesting. Yeah, I think and it gets sticky when you talk about like when it's such a in the box type of hierarchy, corporate hierarchy, and you know that, you know, someone who's innovating at a big company, like that's not always going to be met with open arms, you know, from above. So it's incumbent upon you to make that, you know, make that impact and empower them to do that successfully, I guess, right?
Yeah, 100%. Your job is to unblock them, but also to give them a sense of urgency that they, you know, one, that they have something important to accomplish, and two, that they have, you know, the ability and the capability and the competency to do it.
Totally.
And you know, and that you support them.
So as Maple grows, as the space grows, you know, we're all dealing with this evolution in real time. Like, what are some, you know, talk to me about scaling the company to how many people are you now?
We're about 41.
41. Wow. So what were some of the growing pains, and you know, you can sprinkle in a little hiring insight on this too, like as far as attracting talent and building the organization, what are some of the growing pains and things you're consciously aware of, you know, as we evolve?
So when you start out, you're much smaller. Everybody knows everybody, and you know what everyone's doing in the organization. We're getting to the stage where I still kind of know what people are doing, but or I definitely know everyone, but I don't have full insight into what every person in the organization is doing. Not in the same way that I did when we were much smaller. And so the what that means is that, to begin with, all problems come up to you, and you can give context or direction. Later on, what you need is two people within the organization to work with each other without you having any part of that. And so,
was there a moment when you, because I can relate to that now, is there a moment when, like, they're still coming up to you, they're coming to you, Sid, can you approve this? And you're like, I don't want to approve it. I don't even want to think about it. This needs to be completely off my plate.
Yeah. No, they do, and if it's a simple decision, then I'll just give them a yes. Or what I try and do is give them the context. Like, I'm saying yes to this or no to this because XYZ reason. And so if something like this comes up again, just apply that reasoning, and you'll have the answer for what I would do. But where we're getting to now, so now we have 40 people, and we have teams that need to work together to accomplish projects. And so what I think about now is more visioning. So early on, I could give people context by just being on a call, explaining something. I was talking to people one-on-one most weeks. So up until we're about 15 people, I was probably doing one-on-ones with everyone on the team, you know, maybe once every week to 2 weeks. Now I do one-on-ones with my direct reports every week. But not everyone is getting FaceTime with me. And so what I need to do is give a vision and give clarity as to what I think the future state is. And so what we've done over the last couple of weeks was write out a capital market strategy, and we're writing out our marketing and comms strategy. And this is, I say strategy, but it's more like a blueprint. Like, what is the vision of the end state? What do we need to accomplish, and what are the goals we need to accomplish? What do we need? What capabilities do we need to accomplish that? What are our processes? But it should be like a reference doc that someone in that team can look at to know, here's the capabilities, like here's the people we need to hire, here's what we need to interview for and try and hire, here's the tools and processes we need in place. But the value of that document is that somebody outside that team can also look at it and say, and so somebody in sales, or in our case capital markets, can look at marketing and say, well, here's what marketing does, here's what they don't do, so, you know, here's what we can accomplish together. But there's that clarity and vision helps with execution. And that actually comes back to like a Tony Robbins principle, which is the more you visualize something and the greater the detail that you visualize it in, then you will anticipate the problems that will come up. You will be able to kind of cope with the challenges and push through it. But you're just more likely to succeed. And so what we're trying to do is visualize, what does success for each team look like? And then it's very clear what standards I expect from the people running those teams, what they need to accomplish, and there's no ambiguity. Ambiguity is what kills companies. You look at large companies, whether it's, you know, Coinbase that had 5,000 people, or some other large company, and it's ambiguity scales non-linearly as the number of people at the company grows, and what the executives miss at those companies is providing clarity to people. And a lot of your job is just repeating the message, giving them context. I think a book I read really recently was, it's called Railroader, but it was about this guy, Hunter Harrison, who ran several extremely successful railroads, and he was, you know, considered the greatest railroad CEO ever, and he was around in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And but what he did was he spent a lot of time just going around to every part of the organization and talking to them, and giving them the principles of frugality. But it was repetition. It's proof of work. In crypto, everyone can relate to this idea of proof of work, but it's just hours and time and effort put in. It's not some brilliant strategic insight or something he sat at a whiteboard and did in a closed office without talking to people. He just went around and put in the sweat.
Well, as you grow, like you said, it's important to empower people in the organization and have a clear vision across. Clearly someone who understands the roadmap of Maple is Charlotte, who's running the brand and the community. So talk about I'm curious to hear. And one thing I've noticed is you guys, as much as you try to be, as you are an institutionally focused, brand, you adopt the principles of DeFi and as much as possible into your business, such as, and I do the same thing, community, transparency. Yeah. So I love to see when, some headlines are going around that are a little scary, you guys take the transparent community approach where, hey, I'm going to get on a AMA with the community and we're going to discuss this and we're going to record it and share it. And I see Charlotte is kind of behind all that. So talk to me about the role of the Maple community, because I know there's such a tight-knit group, and I would love to hear about how that's impacted your business.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you have these two competing ethoses in your marketing and comm strategy. One is sort of the crypto native, which I think we try and honor and do pretty well, which is having a community in your Telegram, having an active followership on Twitter and Discord, and doing community calls and AMAs. And then you have the other one, which is, how do we market and communicate trust in the product to our customers who are typically more institutional. What's been cool is that there is overlap where our customers who might be more institutional in nature still come to crypto Twitter to find things out, or still appear in the Discord. But what we try and do is we try and differentiate ourselves through the level of transparency and engagement that we have with the community. So I think this is part of marketing in the 2020s, is that you are going to be more direct contact with your customer set. It's not that they're going to pick up the phone and go through a hotline. They are going to talk to you through Discord, or at you on Twitter, or send you DMs in Telegram. I think FTX is pretty good at this, and I actually heard Brett Harrison talk about how he was engaging with people on Twitter pretty directly when I was listening to a podcast. And so anyway, so what we try and do is we always try and think back, whatever we're communicating, it has to be transparent. So you're going to have crises all the time in this space, just because it's people moving large amounts of money around, and
address it head on.
And it's so early, so address it head on. So when something bad happens, don't put your head in the sand or avoid mentioning it for the sake of appearing weak.
Buttoned up,
in a position of weakness, or where you worry that if we say something bad, everyone's going to overreact. There will always be a spectrum of reactions to whatever you do. So whatever you say, there are going to be some people who think this is ridiculous, other people who draw inferences about it that you don't want, and then there are the people who you have to find them. They're your core, who it will resonate with. They'll appreciate the transparency, and what it does is it builds for the next time they notice something bad happens. You're just going to tell them, and you're going to tell them transparently. So I think people can deal with bad news as long as you say, here's what happened, here's what we're doing to fix it, here's how it impacts you, and here's what you can expect in future, or here's what you can expect to hear from us next. We've tried to take that with everything bad that happens in the space that impacts or people might think impacts us. So, Wintermute during the week was a pretty good example. So we're out front, transparent. Here's the impact. Here's what happened. Here's the impact to you. Here's what we know now, what we're trying to find out, and here's what we'll tell you and how we'll communicate with you.
Love that, man. And it's one of the core, most important principles about crypto, and it's created you guys to have some sort of cult following. The Mapes.
The Mapes. We love the Mapes.
What is it like outside of stuff like that? What goes on in the Maple Discord? What do they? Is there? Do they talk about random topics other than Maple Finance?
Yeah. So we had our funny period where it was about rocket gifts, and so there is a lighter side. So the things you get out of Discord, there's people joking around. So we had a really active community member who we love, Shill Bill, who wanted to see Shill Bill.
Love it.
We love Shill Bill, who wanted to see rocket gifts and a sticker pack. And so we actually had a sticker pack a year back, and now we need to get a new one. But then they also will. What I really like seeing in the community chat on our Telegram is that people will answer. People who are not part of the core Maple team will answer other community members' questions. Because that's when people care enough about it and they know enough about it that they want to help and want to contribute. That's what really pleases me and makes me proud of the community.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, and then it motivates you to try to give back and add value to your community as much as possible. What do you do? What do you do outside of? I mean, just the transparency alone is huge. But is there anything like outside of that you do to add value to your community? Like for me, one thing that I'm really, really pumped about that we're doing now. I don't think I told you about this yet, but like, so if you're like a new client of mine and you come to me and you're just like, hey Dan, can you help me fill these roles? Normally, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna talk to you about it. I'm gonna take some notes and then I'm gonna share it with potential candidates. But I have 4,000 people in my Discord, and I want them to get exposure. So now I'm doing that intake call as an AMA, so that potential candidates who are in, because you got to know who is your community and why are they following you. They're here for opportunities and for engagement. So if I can give them the chance to get on stage with you and ask some questions to figure out whether they are or not a good fit for the role, it's giving them exposure to a founder, and it's like reducing the friction of them of you getting spammed with resumes that aren't good, and them understanding, okay, based on this AMA, I am or am not a fit for this role. And I think it's just a really cool way to add value to the community of people who may never have had the chance to speak to you before. So that's just one. Like, is there anything that you guys are doing to give back to your community?
Yeah, I mean, we do the conventional stuff like meme competitions.
Notice that you just said meme competition as a conventional
as
stuff.
A conventional, conventional thing in the space. But yeah, so we've done that. We've done merch giveaways, but I think the thing that adds value, or that we try and do, which is give them our time. So
sure,
we'll do a community call once a month. We do hosted webinars, but we'll answer any question that people put forward if they want to. If they want to ask something. And, I think it takes bravery to ask questions and be an active participant.
And it takes bravery to answer them transparently.
Yeah.
Even when it's not, a glaring success. Yeah. You know what I mean?
But so we try and do that. And then outside of that, like, I also try and give back to, I guess, the community of startups, just with my time. So if, I think if somebody reaches out and they are trying to found something, or they want to get advice, like I'll usually try and find time to take that call.
Yeah.
Pretty quickly, and just give them thoughts, feedback, and let them know that they can reach out and ask questions and stay in touch.
Brother, I don't know that I have too many more questions for you, man. This has been really, really fun and insightful. I appreciate you for making us look good out here in crypto. We need more of this in the market, what you guys are bringing to the table. So appreciate you. Appreciate Maple Finance. Thanks for coming through, bro.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Cheers, man.
Cheers.